My name is Elijah. I am 31 years old, and I need to tell you something that most people in this country have never had the courage to say out loud. I was owned, not borrowed, not hired, owned, like a mule, like a plow, like a barrel of grain sitting in a warehouse. The year was 1847, and in the leather-bound ledgers of the Beaumont estate in Louisiana, I was not a man with a name, a past, or a soul worth counting. I was item number 47, an $800 investment. That was my entire existence, written in ink that never smudged, never questioned itself, never lost a single night of sleep. But here is what those ledgers never recorded. Inside that numbered body lived a fire that no man, no matter how powerful, how rich, how cruel, could ever fully extinguish. And before I go any further, I need to ask you something. If you were in my place, with nothing left but your own name hidden inside your chest, would you have fought to keep it? Or would you have let them take that too? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's sitting with me through this story. And if you believe that every human being deserves to be seen, hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to a man still telling his story. Now stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. What I am about to tell you is not a story of hatred. It is not a story of revenge, though Lord knows I had every reason. It is something far more dangerous than either of those things. It is a story of what happens when two human beings, caught on opposite sides of an impossible wall, dare to look each other in the eye and refuse to look away. It changed everything. It nearly killed us both. And it set in motion a chain of events so brutal, so unexpected, and so strangely beautiful that even now, sitting in my own home, with my own hands resting on a table I built myself, I still wake at night wondering how any of it was real. Before I go any further, if this is already touching something deep in your chest, something you recognize, stay with me. This story is just getting started. The Beaumont plantation sat like a wound on the land, beautiful from a distance, rotten at the core. I can still feel it. The air there had a smell that never left you, wet soil baking under a sun that had no mercy, the sweetness of sugar cane mixing with the salt of men's sweat, and underneath it all, something sharp and metallic, like old blood soaked so deep into the ground that even the rain couldn't wash it out. The main house was white as a Sunday sermon, with tall columns and wide porches where ladies in pale dresses fanned themselves and spoke softly about God and grace. But 20 yards behind that beauty, past the magnolia trees, the world changed. Dirt floors, thin walls, the sound of children crying themselves to sleep because their stomachs had nothing in them. That was where I lived. That was the real Beaumont. My days began before the sun had any right to be awake. 4 in the morning, sometimes earlier, the bell would cut through whatever dream had been kind enough to visit me, and I would rise from a wooden plank covered with a burlap sack and walk out into the dark. I worked the stables mostly, the horses, the equipment, the endless repairs that kept the estate running like a clock no one thanked. I was good with my hands. Too good, some said, because it made me valuable, and valuable meant watched. Fader Cole watched me especially, a thin man with colorless eyes and a leather strap he wore on his belt like a second skin. He never needed much of a reason, sometimes no reason at all. I learned early to keep my eyes low, my voice lower, and my thoughts buried somewhere so deep inside my chest that no one could ever reach them and take those away from me too. 7 years before that autumn, I had a wife. Her name was Ada. She had a laugh that sounded like water moving over smooth stones, and she carried our daughter Mercy on her back while she worked the fields, singing so quietly that only the cotton could hear. One Tuesday morning in September, I came back from the stables and they were gone. Just gone. No warning, no goodbye. Beaumont had sold them to settle a gambling debt. 2 human beings exchanged for a card game he lost on a Friday night. I did not cry. I could not afford to cry. I folded that grief into something hard and small, and I pressed it down into my bones, where it lived like a stone I carried every single day. That was the wound I walked around with. That was the thing that had hollowed me out long before Elena Beaumont ever walked into those stables and changed the entire direction of my life. It was a Thursday afternoon in late April when everything shifted. I remember the exact quality of the light. It came through the stable doors at a low angle, turning the dust in the air into something almost golden, almost kind. I was replacing a broken shoe on Beaumont's bay stallion when I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the hay behind me. I did not turn immediately. Visitors to the stables were always men, overseers, traders, the occasional plantation guest inspecting horseflesh like they inspected everything else on that property. But something in the silence that followed made me look up. She stood in the doorway with the light behind her, dressed in ivory silk that had no business being anywhere near the smell of horses and leather. Elena Beaumont, the governor's wife, a woman I had seen only from a careful distance, the way a man learns to observe dangerous things, quickly and without being caught doing it. I stood. That was the rule. You always stood when they entered. You dropped your eyes, you squared your shoulders, you became furniture that breathed. I did all of that. But then something happened that had never happened to me in 31 years of living on this earth. She spoke to me, not at me, not past me, not about me as though I were a post she was addressing, but to me, directly, with a steadiness in her voice that had no performance in it. She asked if the roses near the east garden wall needed cutting back before the summer heat set in. A simple question, a gardening question, but her eyes never moved from mine while she asked it, and in those eyes I saw something that cracked me open like dry wood. She was asking me what I thought, my opinion, as though it mattered, as though I was someone whose answer deserved to exist in the same world as hers. I answered carefully, one sentence, measured and low, the way I had trained every word that left my mouth to be. But when I finished, she nodded slowly, not the dismissive nod of a woman who had gotten what she needed and was already turning away, but the nod of someone genuinely receiving information, filing it somewhere real inside herself. Then she left, and I stood in that stable for a long time after, holding a horseshoe that had gone completely cold in my hand, trying to understand what had just happened to me. Something had cracked open in my chest. That stone I had been carrying for 7 years, the one made of Ada and mercy, and every morning I had swallowed my own humanity to survive. It had shifted, just slightly, just enough to let in a sliver of something I had not felt in so long that I had almost forgotten it had a name. Dignity. And dignity, I would soon learn, was the most dangerous thing a man in my position could possess. The garden became our classroom. 3 times a week, sometimes 4, she would appear at the east wall where the roses grew in tangled, stubborn rows that nobody had properly tended in years. I worked. She watched. Then slowly, carefully, like 2 people learning a language that had no alphabet, we began to talk. But it was never simple. Fader Cole had eyes everywhere on that property, in the kitchen windows, among the field hands who reported to him for extra rations, even in the children who ran errands between the big house and the quarters. Every word I spoke to Elena had to sound like instruction, like practical gardening advice, nothing more. I taught her how deep to cut a damaged stem. She told me in return that her husband had been making arrangements to sell 3 families from the east quarters before the winter. I kept my hands moving on the roses while she spoke. I did not let my face change, but inside, something was tightening, coiling, preparing itself for a weight it did not yet fully understand. At night, in the darkness of my quarters, I lay on that wooden plank and had conversations with myself that frightened me. I was not a foolish man. I had survived 31 years in a system designed to destroy men like me precisely because I never confused hope with strategy. And yet there I was, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way she had said my name. Elijah, not boy, not you there, not item 47, and feeling something warm and terrifying spreading through my chest like fever. I knew what it was. I had been trying not to name it, because naming it meant admitting that I had stepped onto ground so dangerous that no amount of caution, no amount of carefully lowered eyes and measured words could fully protect me anymore. I thought about Ada. I thought about Mercy. I thought about the stone in my bones. And then, God help me, I thought about her again. And I made a decision that a wiser man would never have made. The letters began in October. Dinah was 14 years old, a house girl who moved between the kitchen and the upstairs rooms like a small, quiet ghost, and she agreed to carry our notes folded inside the pocket of her apron without ever asking what was in them. I do not know what Ella Lanena told her. I do not know what Dinah understood or suspected, but she carried those letters with a steadiness that shamed grown men I had known. I wrote in the margins of old feed receipts, in the smallest script I could manage, pressing the pencil so lightly that anyone who did not know to look would see nothing at all. Ella Lanena wrote back on torn corners of household ledger paper. Her handwriting was precise and controlled in the first letters, then looser, more urgent as the weeks passed. In one letter she told me that Charles had begun watching her more carefully, that he had questioned the servants about her movements. I folded that letter into the smallest possible square and held it in my fist all night, feeling the edges cut into my palm like a quiet warning. November came cold and sudden, the way trouble always does, without the courtesy of a warning you can actually use. Charles Beaumont began appearing in places he had never bothered with before. The stables at odd hours, the garden paths in the early morning. He never spoke to me directly. He was too practiced for that, too controlled. But I felt his attention the way animals feel a change in the weather, something in the air pressure shifting, something in the quality of the silence around him that made the hair on my arms rise. He was a man who had built his entire world on ownership, on the absolute certainty that everything on his land, every animal, every acre, every human being, belonged to him completely and without question. And something, some instinct, sharpened by years of holding power over others, was telling him that one of his possessions had developed thoughts of its own. I kept my eyes down, I kept my hands busy, but I knew, the way you know a storm is coming even before the first cloud appears, that we were running out of time. The last letter Dinah carried was different from all the others. Ella Lanena's handwriting was uneven in a way I had never seen before, the letters pressing hard into the paper like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. She wrote that Charles had found one of her books, a volume of poetry I had recommended, with a note tucked inside the front cover. Not one of our letters, just a note, a small thing, 3 words written in my hand, but 3 words in my hand inside her book was more than enough. She wrote that he had not confronted her yet, that he was watching, waiting, the way a man waits when he wants to catch something red-handed rather than merely suspicious. She wrote one final line that I read so many times the paper softened at the folds. Whatever happens next, I do not regret a single word. I sat with that sentence in the dark for a very long time. Then I heard boots on the path outside, and the night collapsed around me like a building with its foundation pulled out. They came for me before dawn. 4 men, Cole and 3 others I recognized as Beaumont's hired enforcers, men who did that kind of work with the blank efficiency of people who had long since stopped asking themselves what kind of men they were. They did not knock. The door came off its frame in one push, and the cold air rushed in like it had been waiting for permission. I was already sitting up. Some part of me had never fully slept that night, had been listening for exactly this sound, this particular quality of boots on gravel that meant the waiting was over. They bound my wrists with rope that smelled of tar and dragged me across the yard in the gray pre-dawn light. And it was then, as they pulled me past the main house, that I saw something through the tall parlor window that stopped my heart completely. Charles Beaumont was standing at his desk reading, and spread across that desk, illuminated by lamplight, were our letters. Every single one. Every word I had ever pressed into paper with a hidden pencil. Every word she had written back. All of it, laid out in order, like evidence at a trial that had already reached its verdict. In that single frozen moment, looking through that window with my wrists bound and Cole's hand on my collar, everything I had not allowed myself to fully understand came together with a terrible clarity. Charles had not stumbled onto our letters by accident. He had been collecting them, quietly, methodically, over weeks, intercepting them before or after Dinah carried them, making copies perhaps, building his case with the patience of a man who understood that the most complete kind of destruction is the kind that waits until it has everything it needs. He had let us continue. He had watched us write to each other, reach toward each other, believe for a few precious months that we had built something he could not touch, and then he had taken it all at once, not to punish a moment of weakness, but to annihilate every trace of the world we had tried to build inside the margins of his. I understood then that this was never about the letters. It was about the one thing Charles Beaumont could not tolerate in any creature he owned, the absolute refusal to stop being human. They gave me one night in the cellar before the decision was made. One night in total darkness, with the smell of damp stone and old rot pressing in from every direction, and nothing to do but think. And in that thinking, the impossible shape of my situation became clear as river water after the mud settles. I had two paths. The first, I could give Charles exactly what he wanted, a confession, a performance of broken submission, tell him that I had manipulated his wife, that I had used her kindness against her, that she was innocent, and I was the corruption that had entered his house uninvited. It would save her from the worst of his anger. It would confirm every story he had ever told himself about men like me, dangerous, cunning, less than human, and in doing so, it would make his world feel ordered again. The second path was silence, complete, absolute silence, which meant Ella Lenena would share the punishment, which meant Dinah, that 14-year-old girl who had carried our words without ever asking why, would be questioned until she broke. Both paths asked me to sacrifice something I was not sure I could afford to lose. I chose silence, and I want you to understand what that choice cost me, because it was not the silence of a man who had calculated the odds and picked the better option. It was the silence of a man who finally understood, at the very bottom of everything, who he actually was. For 7 years I had survived by becoming small, by folding myself into the shape that kept me alive, by burying my name and my voice and my right to exist somewhere safe and unreachable. And I had told myself that survival was enough, that staying alive was its own kind of dignity. But in that cellar, in that absolute darkness, I understood that there are things you can lose that are worse than death, and one of them is the knowledge of your own worth. I had written those letters. I had reached toward another human being across an impossible distance and said, "I see you, and I am here, and I refuse to disappear." That was not a crime. That was the most honest thing I had ever done, and I would not confess to it as though it were something shameful. Not for Charles Beaumont, not for anyone. The night the mansion burned, the sky turned the color of a wound. I heard it before I saw it, a deep, low roar that built slowly beneath the usual sounds of the night, like something enormous waking up underground. From the cellar where they had moved me, chained to an iron ring bolted into the wall, I could smell it first. Wood smoke, then something sharper, chemical, the smell of curtains and carpets and decades of carefully maintained privilege catching fire all at once. The heat came next, pressing through the stone walls like a living thing, and then the screaming began. Sharp voices, running feet, the crash of something enormous collapsing on the floor above me. I pulled against the chain until my wrist bled. I heard the bolt groan in the old stone. I pulled again, with everything left in my body, with Ada's name in my throat and Mercy's face behind my eyes, and every letter I had ever written pressing against my ribs from the inside. The bolt gave, the chain swung free, and I moved through the smoke and the orange darkness toward the only door I could find, not knowing if what waited on the other side was escape or something worse. I will never know with absolute certainty how that fire started. What I know is what I found when I broke through the cellar door into the night air. Elena standing 20 yards from the burning house with Dinah beside her, both of them still and watching the flames with expressions I could not fully read in the flickering light. She turned when she heard me. She crossed the distance between us in 6 steps and pressed something into my hand. A small cloth pouch heavy with coins, and inside it, folded tight, every letter I had ever written to her, retrieved from Charles's desk before the fire made that impossible. She said 4 words to me, quietly, with the same steadiness she had carried in her voice that first day in the stables. Then she pointed north. Charles was found at dawn, alive but badly burned. His ledgers and his letters and his carefully constructed evidence reduced entirely to ash. He told the authorities a lamp had fallen. What else could he say? That his wife had dismantled his world while he slept? I was already gone, running north through the Louisiana darkness, following a star that had been guiding people like me toward freedom long before either of us was born, carrying her words in my chest like a compass that never pointed anywhere but forward. Today my hands smell like sawdust and linseed oil. I build furniture, tables, chairs, cabinets with dovetail joints so tight you could not slide a piece of paper between them, in a workshop in Ontario that has my name above the door. Not item 47, my name, Elijah. Elena found me 2 years after that night, traveling north through a network of people who moved quietly and kept no records, carrying nothing but a small bag and the particular kind of courage that belongs to people who have already burned down everything they were afraid of losing. We planted magnolias along the back fence of this property, one for Ada, one for Mercy, one for Dinah, one for every soul we knew whose name the world tried to erase. I never found my wife and daughter. That is a grief I carry still, folded small and pressed deep, the way I learned to carry all my hardest things. But I am here. I am a man with a name, a door with my name on it, and a woman beside me who once looked at me across an impossible distance and refused to look away. Charles Beaumont thought he could own a man completely. What he never understood, what men like him never understand, is that you can chain a body to a wall, but the part of a person that writes letters in the dark, that reaches toward another human being and says, "I exist, I am here, I refuse to disappear," that part was never his to own. It never belonged to anyone but me.